Joining us to discuss the latest on the Israel-Hamas war is the former advisor to Donald Rumsfeld, who was the U.S. Secretary of Defense, and that's Christopher Harvin. Good to have you join us. Thank you very much, Precious. Happy to be here this afternoon. So just moments ago, a senior Hamas leader and key negotiator, Khalid Meshal, said civilians being held by Hamas would be let go if Israel reduces the intensity of bombing in Gaza. Do you believe that? Should there be a negotiated ceasefire to allow for the release of hostages? I think that everyone here in the world, particularly Israel and other nation states that have hostages held in Gaza, would like to see all of those hostages released. This is an act of terror, and at what point do we decide to either negotiate with terrorists or not negotiate with terrorists? It's proven that they haven't been honest. The brutality of what they've done is a terrorist act against women and children. So, I think that everyone would like to see these hostages released. You don't think that if there is a reduction in the bombardment of that area, that at least Hamas would release hostages, going by the precedents that they have set? I would hope they would. I would hope they would, if they agreed to release hostages, that they would keep that word. But again, we're negotiating with terrorists who butchered women and children, innocent women and children, I might add. And let's talk about the broader scope of this war. U.S. has said that it expects this war to escalate through involvement by proxies of Iran. We also know that U.S. has military advisors on ground helping out in this war. How far-reaching do you think that the U.S. help, as it were, would go? Because the U.S. is also tied when it comes to Ukraine-Russian war. We have to look at this and take a step back. The U.S. was under attack on 9/11 by terrorists. The world joined forces with us to fight terrorism, to condemn terrorism, and to ensure that Al-Qaeda and ISIS were eradicated, and to the extent we could. And I think that the world needs to join together to look at what's really happening, that these are terrorists in Gaza. This isn't a conventional army. These are terrorists, and this is an Iran-backed proxy, just like a Hezbollah, just like some of the other Iraq-type militias that are attacking U.S. troops currently. So when we talk about it escalating, this is already a proxy war, and the Iranians are highly involved in this. And listen to the former leader of Hamas, the son to the former leader of Hamas, who was asking for U.S. to send. He has now defected to the side of Israel. He's now living in the U.S. as well. He was asking for U.S. to send Navy SEAL to assist Israel in this war. Do you think that there should be boots on the ground in Israel? I think the coalition of those who want to fight terrorism, who want to promote democracy and peace and stability in the region, should join forces. I don't necessarily agree with U.S. boots on the ground. I think it has to be an international force. And I think that we have to take into account the women and the children in Gaza. And we have to look at what is the solution to peace. Is it a two-state solution? Is it the eradication of Hamas and other terrorist groups? Which is a given that this group and other groups like them should not be able to attack women and children freely. And the world has to join together to fight this type of terrorism. And if you were to have, we know that Hezbollah has been trying to also be part of this war from Lebanon. But if we were to have proxies of Iran also join this war against Israel, how far-reaching, or what is the implication of that for Israel? Does it have the military capacity in terms of number and weapons to execute such to defend itself? So Hezbollah changes. If Hezbollah enters the war, this changes the aspect of what's happening in Gaza. It opens up another front with a much more capable fighting force, with much more troops, that has much more command and control, that's much more influenced by Iran from training and weapons and support, similar to what's happening in Gaza and with Hamas and other areas in Iraq. I think that the U.S. doesn't want a war. The U.S. wants peace in the region. I think that's the same for Jordan, for Saudi Arabia, for UAE. No one wants a war in the Middle East. The actions that Hamas took pushed back the Abraham Accords,
the economic development in the region, and created really significant problems for the kingdom, the Emirates, and other countries in the region.
Israel has said it will make ground incursion into Gaza. The U.S. has asked it to hold off that ground incursion. A lot of people or analysts who have defense knowledge, like you do, have described that ground incursion as one of the most complicated missions that Israel Defense Forces will have to undertake. How advisable is that incursion, and how necessary is it?
Well, Hezbollah, not Hezbollah, but Hamas and Gaza. Hamas is fortified within Gaza in tunnels, and it takes an aspect of asymmetrical warfare, guerrilla warfare. It's not a conventional army such as Israel, so it's very difficult to fight in Gaza, going door to door to eradicate these terrorists that, in effect, are hiding behind civilians. They're hiding weapons in schools. They're hiding behind hospitals and command and control aspect. Their leadership is hiding even in other countries. So this is a very difficult situation for Israel. Israel doesn't want casualties for women and children in Gaza. The U.S. and its allies do not want any kind of casualties among women and children, but we have to eradicate terrorism. And unfortunately, women and children were killed in Israel. And these terrorists need to stop hiding behind the women and children. And Israel has the right to defend itself, as did the U.S. on 9/11. But we must, the U.S. is trying to exercise caution, trying to keep peace, trying to minimize collateral damage to civilian infrastructures. And at the end of the day, everyone wants peace in the region, and we want to eradicate terrorism. But where does that start? And how does it end? And do other countries in the region that support terrorism, such as Iran, become involved in this and like it spread? While we're putting the eye on the U.S. and its involvement, we should actually be discussing Iran and how it's backing these terror organizations to attack U.S. interests, to create trouble in Israel, to create violence, and to disrupt the regional peace and the Abraham Accords.
And just like the war between Russia and Ukraine, we've seen how this has divided countries around the world. The last UNSC, which is United Nations Security Council meeting, countries were pretty much divided on whether there should be a ceasefire or not. We've had countries who voted for a ceasefire, countries that abstained, and countries who voted against a ceasefire. But if there was going to be a ceasefire, what timing do you think that should happen, and who can negotiate that ceasefire?
I think that it has to be in the interest of both sides to have a ceasefire. And I think that we have to figure out where Iran is in the region, and continually to back terror and violence and undermine democratic values in the region, and undermine Western capitalism in the region. And we have to also look at the other countries that are voting against this fighting terrorism, or who are backing terrorist states, the North Koreans, the Russians, the Iranians. We have to look at who these countries are. We can't just say there are those countries that are voting against ceasefires, or they're voting against fighting terrorism. We have to look at the terrorists, who's sponsoring these terrorists.
And I wanted to ask you what role Mahmoud Abbas plays in all of this, because he's pretty much silent, and we know that he's quite weakened. But what role does he play in all of this?
I think from a perspective of Gaza, I think the political leadership is very similar to Lebanon. That it's beholden to the terrorists, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah. I think that you look at the areas in the region that are very affected by terrorism, whether it's Syria, Iran, and these are considered failed states. And at the end of the day, I think that Abbas and some of these, other leadership in whether Lebanon or Gaza or the West Bank, they need to get it together and protect their people. They really need to project that they want peace, that they want these terror groups, out of their land, and that they want to protect their people, and they need to be working towards that. And I think at the end of the day, that we do need to look at what the solution in the region is to ensure the Palestinian people are taken care of. that we need to also ensure that the peaceful citizenship and lifestyle of the Israelis. So I think the region needs to come together and work together. I do think we need to exercise caution in moving toward and beating the drums on war and moving towards war. I think that includes Iran, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the U.S., Israel, Lebanon. I think we all need to work together. Now, that said, I don't see that Iran and so these terror groups are going to work with the West to ensure that. That's not what they want. They want a disruption of lifestyle. They want a disruption of the normal political diplomacy that's been occurring in the region that's really benefiting the Arab people. It's benefiting the Israelis. It's benefiting the global order. But when things like this happen, it disrupts that and it sets us back generations.
Former advisor to U.S. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, Christopher Harvin, thank you so much for talking to us as always.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon.